Hello and welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to actually talk about the Fate Adversary Toolkit. This is a pre-release book that I managed to get my hands on as a Patreon supporter for Evil Hat. Um, and I used it during my home game last night to great effect, and we ended up having a fantastic session. The entire session ended up being this one long, multi-pronged combat that was a lot of fun. Everybody had a great time. So the Fate Adversary Toolkit is a project that is coming out later in the summer, and what it does is it contains rules for how to build and strategize with adversaries. Now, adversaries can be your typical like opponents, like you've got your big bad warrior, your giant monster, and they divide those up into what is it? Threats, hitters, bosses, and fillers. So threats, let me just pull my notes over here. Threats exist to soak up hits. Basically, they're big bad, like if you imagine like an elephant, there to take a lot of damage but don't deal a lot of damage. Hitters are the opposite. They're typically called glass cannons. I've played a lot of rogues that were glass cannons that did a lot of damage, but man, if you hit them, they did not have a good day. Uh, Bosses are basically strong in both hitting and taking damage. Last night's fight did not involve a boss. It involved mostly threats and hitters and filler. And fillers are everybody else. They're like minions, small level mooks, things like that are there to fill out the session, to fill out the what's going on. Let's see, the Fate Adversary Toolkit also, in addition to having adversaries, it has things like obstacles and constraints. And obstacles are broken down into hazards, blocks, and distractions. Hazards are things like a gun firing turret. Blocks are things that get in the PC's way, like a magical force field that prevents them from getting where they need to. And distractions, they exist basically to make the PCs have to make a difficult choice. It's sort of like the classic Superman adventure, where Superman has to either save the bus full of school children or prevent Lex Luthor from getting away. What's Superman going to do? We know he will save the school children, but there is still a choice that has to be made. And then lastly, constraints. There are countdowns, which create a sense of urgency. So, like something bad is going to happen whenever the last checkbox for that gets counted. There are limitations, sort of like how werewolves require silver in order to be struck. Um, and then there are resistances, which I guess so. Yeah, resistances are the werewolves being resistant to silver, but the limitations prevent PCs from taking a certain kind of action. The book itself is fantastic. I want to talk about my session and how that went with this last night. And it was a lot of fun. So I've called up in the video here. This is the map, the zone map that I made. We play online, so this was imported into Roll20. There is you can see there in the center. There's actually a house. The characters were here trying to find some information. There's some paperwork in the house. And at the end of the previous session, before we started last night, the house was under attack by magical fireballs and some opponents who were down in the lower left or lower right hand corner, um, who were beginning an assault on the home. So this caught the house on fire, and it's fate, so you have to have on fire. So that set the house on fire, and the characters had to go through. They were taking care of a bunch of different things. There was the elderly man who lived in the home. There was them trying to get the paperwork that they needed, and then taking care of the opponents. So let's talk for a moment about who the opponents were. Let me just switch to this. So this is my note for this particular event. Um, let's see, if we come down here, the aspects on the scene was clear line of sight in all directions. If you remember the battle map here, that there was a large field, so that clear line of sight was an aspect that was in use by everybody who was in the scene. Then there was a hazard called aggressive fire magic. Basically, anyone who was outside of the house or near a window inside the house was attacked by aggressive fire magic, which had a +2 to attack and was weapon 4. To overcome it was a difficulty of 5 because there was a wizard in the woods who was well hidden, who was basically throwing fireballs. And this was actually the first thing that the characters took out. I did not actually get to try and hit them with aggressive fire magic. They took it out pretty quick, and that's fine. They've got to do their thing. So next up, the house itself. Because I love the bronze rule so much, I made the fact that the house was on fire its own character. So there was fire, which actually caused a little bit of cognitive dissonance in one of my players, where they're like, "The fire doesn't think or talk," which that's true, but at the same time, this is one of the things that makes Fate work. So it had an aspect. Morency's house is on fire, Morency being the owner of the house, and the house itself was a disorganized mess. The fire did its thing at a +2. It had weapon 1. Basically, the main point of the fire was this countdown clock right here. They had 2 rounds before the fire was going to burn away the paperwork that they needed, making their particular situation a little bit more difficult. The players did actually manage to affect a lot of stress on it. They actually gave it a mild consequence of smoldering as they started to put it out, and they took care of the fire pretty quickly. I think by the oh goodness, by the middle of the second round, the fire was out and that was taken care of. Now the next thing, outside. Again, let's take a look at this map. Outside, so the fire was going on inside the building. Outside, there were a bunch of bad guys taking out or trying to take out the heroes. So first there was a giant rhinoceros. If you think of it being the like bigger than a small house, basically wild bloods. That's a term from my game. I'm not going to explain it here, but basically it just means like a little bit more monstrous. If you think like dire rhinoceros, you're on the right track. So it is, as the aspects, bigger than a small house and all muscle, no finesse, which I kind of view as both. It's a trouble aspect that's also a good one. Um, it had physique at 5, survival 4, fight 4, and had a will of 2. I had to assign it a will of 2 in the middle of combat because the heroes were doing things that required it to resist with will, and I'm like, this is a large, strong monster. It should have better than 0 at this. Um, the rhinoceros had a rider, and because it had a rider, it gained some benefits. So it had armor 2 as long as he had a rider, and had a stunt to allow it to attack everyone in a zone as long as it is guided by the rider. I didn't write it down here, but it was only once a scene. Um, and I used that to pretty great effect. But let me talk about the rider first. So the rider was the master of the rhino, and he cares for his beast. He has shoot 5, survival 4, athletics 4, and was a little bit more of a. So the rhinoceros wild blood of war was the threat that can absorb damage, and the rider was the hitter that was able to do a lot of damage, at least in theory. What ended up happening is that the rider, while they were some distance away and the heroes were focusing on things going on around the building and taking care of the sorcerer in the woods, the rider was building advantages, and actually got 2 rounds worth of create advantages on the rhinoceros, which was actually pretty cool because the last advantage that was created by the rider was getting ready to charge. And of course, the next turn on its turn, it charged and ran right through the building where everybody except for one of the players was, and attacked everyone in the zone. And it was a devastating hit because I just stacked all of those create advantages on top for a big hit. I don't feel so bad about providing a big hit for the players because they actually like got to see it coming round over round. So they were at least mentally prepared for it, even though they were taking care of other things. So it wasn't a surprise hit. Um, let's see. Once the rider was taken out, the rhinoceros was pretty easy to handle. We've got a player who has ranks in ride, and that was so the rhinoceros is pretty easy to take out at that point. In addition, there were a motley crew of hired snipers. There were 8 little filler minions who had a shoot of +1. They did a combination of create advantage as well as doing some shooting and actually attacking. I actually took out one character in this scene last night, but that's because he just kept getting in the way and absorbing hits, and the player was actually having a great time with it. Um, so that worked out really well. Now, all of this, the rhinoceros, the fire, the aggressive fire magic, whenever I wrote this up, I wasn't confident that the encounter was going to be balanced. I thought like, oh well, this is totally going to be a slaughter. Um, and so I actually wrote up something that I have mentally been calling kind of like scene stunts. They are stunts that a scene has that can be used by the players. And I'm probably going to write up a blog post about this at some point. But basically, what this was is the old man who was in the whose house this was, Old Man Morency. I gave him, there was a stunt to represent him. And at any time, the players may check this box to have him absorb 2 stress from a single source, basically giving them an additional amount of stress that they could absorb. However, this mortally wounds him, but he doesn't die until the end of the scene so that we can have like all of the appropriate talking things. The players, surprisingly enough, did not kill Old Man Morency, despite the fact that I've got a player who believes that killing NPCs is the right thing to do. He doesn't do it intentionally or maliciously, but it's just one of those things that every time he's around an NPC, bad things happen. And so that's how you get a reputation sometimes. So that was a great combat. It took about 2.5 hours to play all the way through. We went from being fully stocked on fate points at the start of the session to one of the players having 1 fate point left, and it was pretty phenomenal. So basically, this running through the Fate Adversary Toolkit was an incredible success. I cannot wait for this book to actually come out so that I can start recommending it for people to purchase and buy immediately. I also, since I also run the Fate SRD, I'm hoping that it ends up being open sourced. I'd love to add it, but if that doesn't happen, that's okay. The book is very affordable. Right now, it's listed as $15 whenever it goes on sale, so that is immensely affordable. So yeah, so Fate Adversary Toolkit, lots of really great advice, and it led to a fantastic combat session. So thank you very much.